For years, viewers believed the romance between Melissa Gilbert and Dean Butler on television was simply part of a beloved family story. Millions watched their characters fall in love, marry, and build a life together on screen, rarely questioning how those scenes were filmed. But decades later, Melissa Gilbert looked back at those moments and admitted something that stunned many longtime fans. When she recently searched old photos of herself from that period, the memories did not feel nostalgic at all. Instead, she said the reality behind those scenes made her feel deeply uncomfortable in a way she never fully understood at the time. The discovery that changed Melissa Gilbert's perspective. Melissa Gilbert spent much of her childhood growing up in front of television audiences. When she first stepped into the role of Laura Ingalls, she was only a child, barely old enough to fully understand how much the series would shape her life. Week after week, viewers watched her grow up on screen, following Laura's journey from a spirited young girl into a young woman experiencing love, marriage, and adulthood. For many fans, the transition felt natural because it happened gradually over many seasons. But for Gilbert herself, looking back now as an adult has given her a completely different perspective. The moment that triggered this reflection came during a heated public conversation online. Commentator Megyn Kelly had made controversial remarks about Jeffrey Epstein, suggesting that some people argued he was not technically a pedophile because he preferred teenage girls rather than very young children. The comments sparked widespread backlash, especially from women who felt that such language minimized the reality of teenage vulnerability. Soon after, social media filled with posts under the hashtag #IWas15, where women shared photos of themselves at that age to remind the public just how young 15 really is. Gilbert saw those posts and decided to do something simple that quickly turned emotional. She opened a search engine and typed in her own name along with the age she had been during the later seasons of the show. What she found immediately stopped her. Among the results were publicity photos and television stills from the time when her character Laura began a romantic relationship with Almanzo Wilder, played by Dean Butler. In those images, the two actors appeared affectionate, hugging and kissing as part of their characters' storyline. For viewers, those scenes had always symbolized the beginning of a sweet love story. But when Gilbert saw the photos again decades later, she suddenly realized something that had never truly registered with her before. At the time those scenes were filmed, she was only 15 years old. Dean Butler, who played her love interest, was 23. The difference suddenly felt much larger than it had during production. The images that once represented television romance now carried a different emotional weight for her. She wrote openly that looking at those pictures through the lens of adulthood made her feel almost nauseated because the girl smiling in those images was still very much a child. What made the realization even more striking was how ordinary the situation had seemed at the time. During production, the storyline simply followed the historical narrative of Laura Ingalls and Almanzo Wilder. In the original books, Laura was significantly younger than Almanzo when their relationship began. The television series had tried to stay close to that timeline, and the actors simply followed the script they were given. Yet decades later, the context of those scenes looked different when viewed through modern conversations about age, consent, and power dynamics. The kiss that felt very different behind the scenes. The moment that symbolized the turning point in Laura and Almanzo's relationship came during the episode titled Sweet 16. For fans of the series, that scene was remembered as a milestone. It was the moment when Laura Ingalls, who viewers had watched grow from a mischievous child into a young woman, finally experienced her first real romance. On screen, the relationship between Laura and Almanzo unfolded in a gentle and heartfelt way, fitting perfectly with the tone of the show. But behind the scenes, both actors were quietly aware that the situation was more complicated than viewers realized. When the script called for Laura and Almanzo to share their first kiss, The production treated it as an important moment for the storyline. Yet neither Melissa Gilbert nor Dean Butler approached the scene with the carefree confidence that audiences might have imagined. In fact, Butler later admitted that both of them felt a strong sense of anxiety before filming it. The scene required them to portray genuine affection, but the reality of their age difference hung quietly in the background. At the time, Butler was already in his 20s and working as a young professional actor. Gilbert, on the other hand, was still in her mid-teens, growing up while playing the role. Even though the story followed the historical timeline of Laura Ingalls Wilder's life, the actors themselves were navigating an awkward situation that required maturity far beyond Gilbert's age. Butler later explained that when he looked back on those moments, he often wished things had been different. He once told Gilbert directly that he wished they had been closer in age when they filmed those scenes, because it might have made portraying their relationship feel more natural. Despite the discomfort, both actors handled the moment professionally. They understood that the scene mattered for the narrative, and they stepped forward to perform it as the script required. Butler later recalled that there was tension on both sides as the cameras prepared to roll. Neither of them quite knew how the moment would feel or how it would be received. But once filming began, they completed the scene, and the series continued moving toward the storyline that would eventually lead to Laura and Almanzo's marriage. What makes the story particularly interesting is that the uneasiness surrounding that kiss did not disappear with time. Years later, Butler spoke openly about it during a cast reunion event, acknowledging that the experience had always felt a little strange. He emphasized that the historical characters themselves had a significant age gap, but that did not automatically make filming those scenes easy for the actors involved. Why Melissa Gilbert decided to speak out now. For decades, Melissa Gilbert rarely revisited the details of those scenes publicly. Like many actors who spent their childhood working in television, she often focused on the positive memories of the show rather than the uncomfortable ones. The series had been a major part of her life for many years, and it gave her friendships, professional opportunities, and a place in television history. But the recent public debate surrounding the hashtag #IWas15 forced her to look at that period in a completely new way. The conversation began after remarks made by Megyn Kelly during an episode of her program. While discussing the case involving Jeffrey Epstein, Kelly referenced a debate that had appeared in some media discussions about how certain allegations were being described publicly. Some commentators had attempted to draw distinctions between different types of cases involving minors. Her comments quickly triggered strong reactions online. Many people felt that framing the issue in that way risked overlooking how vulnerable teenagers can be. Critics emphasized that individuals in their mid-teens are still minors and should always be recognized and protected as such. Soon after the remarks began circulating on social media, many women from different backgrounds started sharing photos of themselves at 15 years old. The hashtag quickly gained momentum. By posting real images from their teenage years, participants wanted to highlight an important point. People at that age are still very young, even if old photos might make them seem more mature at first glance. Alongside the images, some participants also reflected on their personal experiences growing up, speaking about difficult or uncomfortable situations they faced during their teenage years. Their stories helped reinforce the message that teenagers deserve understanding, respect, and protection. Gilbert watched this wave of posts and began thinking about her own experience at that same age. Curiosity led her to search for photographs from when she was 15. What she discovered brought back a flood of memories she had not examined closely in years. Among the results were pictures of herself filming scenes with Dean Butler during the later seasons of the show. Some of the images showed the two actors embracing. Others showed them kissing during the romantic storyline between Laura and Almanzo. Looking at those images again as a 61-year-old woman created a reaction she had not expected. Gilbert admitted that seeing them made her feel physically uncomfortable. She wrote openly that she felt nauseated when she realized the girl in those photos was still a teenager who had been asked to portray romantic love with a man who was already an adult. From her perspective today, the situation suddenly seemed shocking in a way it had not at the time. At the same time, Gilbert made it clear that she did not blame the people who worked with her during the series. She emphasized that she had been protected throughout production. Her mother was closely involved in her work, and Michael Landon, who played her father on the show and also served as its producer and director, was known for carefully watching over the young actors on set. According to Gilbert, those adults made sure she was safe and supported during filming. The moment, Michael Landon stepped in. As the conversation about Melissa Gilbert and Dean Butler spread online, many fans began revisiting old behind-the-scenes stories from the series. One detail that resurfaced involved Michael Landon, the actor who played Charles Ingalls and served as one of the most influential figures behind the production. Landon was not only a leading star of the show, but also a producer and director who had enormous control over how the series was filmed. For many of the younger actors, he was both a mentor and a protective presence on set. One story in particular illustrates how seriously Landon took his responsibility during filming. Dean Butler once shared a memorable moment from the set that demonstrated just how intense Landon could be when directing a scene. Butler recalled the experience during a podcast conversation with fellow cast members, where they discussed some of their favorite memories working with Landon. During the filming of one scene, Butler had to perform a physical moment where he was supposed to suddenly go limp as part of the action. The scene took place inside a barn set, and the stunt required precise timing so that everything looked realistic on camera. Landon instructed Butler to relax his body during the movement, but Butler admitted that he was so energized by the moment that he kept forgetting to do it properly. According to Butler, Landon told him several times to go limp, but the instruction did not fully register. Butler stayed too tense, which made the movement look unnatural. After the same mistake happened again, Landon finally lost patience. In a sudden burst of frustration, he grabbed Butler, lifted him up, and threw him across the barn set while shouting the same instruction once more. The unexpected moment shocked Butler as he flew through the air and landed on the ground, rolling across the floor of the set. The crew watching the scene burst into laughter, partly because the moment was so surprising, and partly because it perfectly illustrated Landon's physical strength and commanding personality. Butler later joked that he received an unforgettable lesson in how powerful Landon really was. Looking back, Butler made it clear that the incident was entirely his own fault. He explained that he had been too excited about the scene and had not followed the instructions correctly. After Landon's dramatic demonstration, the next take went smoothly. Butler finally relaxed during the movement, and the scene was completed without further problems. Although the story has often been told humorously, it also highlights something deeper about the atmosphere on the set of the series. Landon had a reputation for running a disciplined production, but he also cared deeply about the people working with him. Many actors who worked on the show have said that he treated the cast like a family and watched closely over the younger performers. Why fans are seeing the story differently today? As Melissa Gilbert's comments spread online, many longtime fans of the series began revisiting the show with a new perspective. For decades, the relationship between Laura and Almanzo had been remembered as one of the most wholesome love stories on television. Viewers watched their connection develop slowly, beginning with shy glances and awkward conversations, before eventually turning into marriage and family life. It was a storyline that perfectly matched the warm tone of the series, which had always emphasized values like love, patience, and loyalty. But Gilbert's recent reflections reminded audiences that the actors behind those characters were living through a very different reality. At the time those scenes were filmed, she was still a teenager who had spent most of her life working on the show. While viewers saw Laura Ingalls growing into adulthood, Gilbert herself was still navigating the complicated transition between childhood and maturity in the real world. The emotional gap between the character and the actress is something that many people did not fully consider while watching the show. Dean Butler has also spoken honestly about that time in his career. When he joined the series, he was already in his early 20s and beginning to establish himself as a professional actor. Playing Almanzo Wilder meant stepping into one of the most important roles in the story because Laura's romance with Almanzo was a major turning point in the narrative. Butler understood the responsibility of portraying that relationship convincingly, but he later admitted that the age difference between himself and Gilbert sometimes made those scenes feel complicated. In interviews years later, Butler explained that he had often told Gilbert he wished they had been closer in age during those seasons. He believed that if they had shared more common ground as young performers, it might have made portraying the romantic side of their characters easier and more natural. Even though the relationship between Laura and Almanzo followed the historical timeline of the real people they were based on, the actors themselves were navigating a situation that required sensitivity and professionalism. Despite the awkwardness that occasionally surfaced behind the scenes, both Gilbert and Butler continued to respect each other and remained proud of the work they created together. The series itself went on to become one of the most beloved television dramas of its era, with millions of viewers still returning to it decades later. The characters of Laura and Almanzo remain central to the show's legacy, representing the moment when the story shifted from childhood adventures to adult relationships and responsibilities. What Gilbert's recent comments have done is add a new layer of understanding to that legacy. Instead of erasing the story, her reflections encourage audiences to look at it more honestly. They remind viewers that actors who grow up on television often experience situations that feel very different when revisited later in life. The emotions that once seemed ordinary can take on new meaning when viewed through the lens of adulthood. Looking back at these moments from the series, many fans are now seeing the story between Melissa Gilbert and Dean Butler in a completely different way. What once looked like a simple television romance now carries a deeper story behind the scenes. What do you think about Melissa Gilbert's reflections on those scenes today? Do you see the show differently now, or does it still feel the same to you? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about the real moments behind your favorite classic shows.